Now, to our main feature, an interview with the American ambient composer Harold Budd. He's got a rather unusual history. He was a disciple of John Cage back in the 60s, although now he's better known for Eno-esque soundscapes and collaborations with people like the Cocteau Twins and Andy Partridge of XTC. He was in town recently to promote his new CD, Luxa, so I met up with him and CD cover in hand. I wondered if I was correct in thinking that the track titles on his latest work were like the titles of paintings.
That's absolutely correct. Yes. For example, Nicky D, the first piece on the album, obviously, well, obvious to me anyway, refers to the French artist Nicky de Saint-Phal. And to be perfectly honest with you, I didn't try to make music that was a one-to-one relationship. The music is not about the art at all. It just simply seemed to work to me, you know, it's a hunch. That's all there was. When I lived here in London, I was often kind of out of sorts and a little bit depressed, as one gets in any city. And Nicky de Saint-Phal was being represented by Gimpel Phil's gallery in Berkeley Square. And I would tool down there and just enjoy a half hour walking around her pieces. And it just made me feel really good. Then I went across the street to Selfridges and bought some Calvin Klein men's cologne and went back feeling very much refreshed.
People listening to your music in this program, or indeed they might know it before, would be very surprised to learn that you used to play drums, or you started off playing drums with Albert Ayler.
Well, when I was a teenager, I loved bebop, and all of my friends loved bebop. And it was my ambition to be Art Blakey or Kenny Clark, but I wasn't good enough at it. But I was good enough at it to where I played bebop all the time, as a hobby, really.
And from jazz, you got into sort of early 60s avant-garde scene, didn't you?
Yes, exactly. Let's see, when that really struck, I think it was about 1961, I went to a lecture given by John Cage and David Tudor called, if memory serves, Where Are We Going and What Are We Doing? That absolutely was an epiphany for me. It just opened up a whole world that I knew was lurking out there, but I didn't know how to touch it, because all of my professors in university were completely antagonistic to this entire thing. In fact, the gentleman who brought John and David there was fired. Can you imagine that? No sexual indiscretion, no showing up drunk. No, he brought an artist to school and was fired for it. It was so outrageous that I decided to just not participate in the musical life of university at all.
So did this epiphany affect your music making after that?
It did very profoundly, yes. One of the things it did was steer me over into the visual arts of people about the same age. So I discovered the world that was being made myth by Rothko and Klein. This, to me, opened up a whole world that I just didn't know existed. And I took to it like a duck to water. I mean, I knew I wanted to be over there.
So when did you start recording?
Oh, I didn't start recording until... I'll tell you what had happened. In 1972, when I wrote Madrigals of the Rose Angel, I thought this is the direction of the rest of my life, that I was going to write music that was as offensively pretty as possible, and do it as often as I could.
How was that to do with your sort of experience in the 60s with Cage?
I think it was very much a reaction against Cage and the avant-garde. It was on purpose anti-avant-garde. That is exactly what I meant, and that's exactly what I did. And I'm afraid that some people have accused me, if that's the right word, of effectively destroying the avant-garde tradition of the 60s. Well, I might have had some part in that. And now as a more sage, older gent, I sort of feel like that's not a very nice thing to do. But back then, this was warfare. I mean, I was aggressive. And in my gentle way, tingling little bells and girls singing very softly, we're tearing down the foundations of American vanguard music. Anyway, a tape of that piece, I don't know how in the world, it's circulated all over creation as far as I can tell. Not by me. I wasn't a careerist. But Michael Nyman and Gavin Bryars got a copy of it, and they took it to Eno. And Eno at the time was starting a kind of record company for strange music. I don't know how else to put it. But he called me at my home in Los Angeles and asked me basically, is this the sort of thing you do? I said that it was, and one thing leads to another, and several months later I was here in London recording it, and I saw for the first time in my life what recording really means. It isn't just documentary, but it's a neutral palette. You can do anything with it that you want.
You must have a lot in common in the sort of processes that you work with.
Well, he's the one that really showed me how to use the studio as your palette once again. Just the philosophical splash that you use a studio in a way that everyone else doesn't, and you use it as one of your primary tools. That was revelatory to me.
You've actually done quite a lot of collaborations, haven't you? You collaborated with Brian Eno, as you mentioned, and
Yes.
There's a collaboration with the Cocteau Twins,
Right.
and one with Andy Partridge. They're all collaborations of choice.
Of choice, without question.
Do you like collaborating with other artists?
I love working with other artists. Absolutely adore it. I think that the whole idea is kind of a brainlessly simple one. Let's just see what happens. I'm not saying what Andy thinks of me, for example, or why he wanted to do it. Oh, I do have a funny story. I will tell you how that came about. And
This is the one with Andy Partridge.
It is indeed. And this may be apocryphal, but it's a great story anyway. So Andy went to Tokyo with Richard Branson to open up a Virgin Megastore in Tokyo. We have a mutual friend named Ray Hearn, who was a concert promoter in Japan. And Andy told me that he and Ray got viciously ripped to shreds on sake one night. And while they could still talk, Ray said, "Why don't you do an album with Harold Budd?" And Andy said, "That's the strangest idea I have ever heard in my life. Yes, let's do it." And Ray immediately got the ball rolling, and it turned out that way. I thought it was a strange idea, too.
Were you happy with the album?
Yeah, it's okay. You know what you're supposed to do is to try to come up with something that neither one of you would do if you were left to your own devices. The whole idea is, let's see what happens. You know, that collaboration is always a risk. But I don't see the point in doing anything in art that doesn't have a big risk factor in it. I don't think the album is as good as XTC's albums, to be perfectly frank with you. But I had such a damn wonderful time, and I'm not embarrassed about anything that's on the album. And I think there's some rather remarkable moments in there, which I'm extremely proud of.
Harold, I read you saying that on this new album, Luxa, you've been experimenting with musical patterns. Can you give us an example of that?
Very definitely I can. For example, the work Nove Alberi, it's just under 6 minutes. But I began by just saying, well, make up a click track for me that last 6 minutes. And then I found 4 or 5 compatible or maybe incompatible sounds. And I began just playing the same thing. For example, I would count 20 beats and then play the 5-note thing. Another 20 beats and play it again. And the next one I just arbitrarily say, well, every measure and a half in 4/4 time, something mindlessly simple, until I just found a pattern that seemed to work. I mean, once again, it's just a hunch. And then just start putting the pattern down. Then stopping everything and listening to what you got. Having gotten something that really makes sense and sounds good and rather intriguing, and everyone's laughing at the accidents that happen, like the 2 things happening at the same time, and then making it better by just placing certain discrete little sounds here and there that act as a sort of a glue. And Nove Alberi does that. Chet most certainly does that. That's a long 7-minute one, kind of haunting, and I wanted it to be moody and long and strange and have vast amounts of forbidden silence in it. And I think in many respects it's my favorite piece on the album, Chet.